Namaste and Swagatam to this course on the Introduction to Basic Spoken Sanskrit. The objective of the course are as follows. The first would be to give a taste of Sanskrit as a spoken language. Next, to develop an appreciation of its sounds and grammatical structures. Third, to share some simple verses which have profound meanings and can make a big difference on our lives. Next, to give confidence that this language can be learnt and spoken easily. And finally, to inculcate a sense of great admiration for the wonder that is Sanskrit. I hope that by the end of this course, you will understand that Sanskrit is not just a language, but it has much more to offer the one who is inspired to delve deeper into the subject. But before we go into Sanskrit directly, I thought it would be very helpful to ask some very fundamental questions about languages themselves. So what is a language? What is its purpose? Should one invest in learning it well? Why? What is the relationship of language with culture, with the mind? What are some challenges involved in learning any language? So we'll take up the first question and look at it more closely. What is a language? The English word language comes from the vulgar Latin term linguaticum, which means tongue. Another origin of the term language is from the Latin lingue, which means tongue or speech. This is probably due to the fact that the tongue played a very important role in the articulation of language. The Sanskrit word for language is bhasha. Bhasha means speech. It comes from the Sanskrit root bhash, which means to speak. But if you delve deeper into this word, it can be derived from the root bha, and bha means to shine. So a very natural question is, what is shining forth? Our thoughts? Our personality? Let's look at the next question regarding language, which is, what is its purpose? As we have seen in the previous slide, the word bhasha or language is a tool that throws light on our thoughts. In the Laghu Nyasa from the Taittiriya Brahmana, there is a verse that says, Agnirme vachi shritaha. Fire is in my speech. So our speech is an illuminator of what is happening in our thoughts. And therefore, when we put fire in our speech, it not only enlightens our thoughts, but it also gives us a sense of responsibility on how we need to use language, because what we speak and what we write becomes a reflection of who we are, and therefore the need to start paying closer attention to language irrespective of which culture it belongs to. Secondly, another important purpose of language, of course, and that's the most commonly understood meaning of language, is that it is a medium of communication of thoughts, either through speech or through writing. There is an interesting concept in Sanskrit tradition which links the notion of language to the concepts of nama and rupa. Every word has these two aspects. There is the aspect of the name or the sound of the word, and there is the aspect of the form of the word. So the name corresponds to the sound and the form corresponds to the written aspect of the language. In Sanskrit, we will discover as we go down the line how it has very beautifully been able to map a very intimate relationship between the sound, the meaning, as well as the form of the sound itself. So the third important aspect of language is that it is a tool for the creation of experiences. Now what do I mean by that? Normally in the physical world, there is a very intimate connection between a sound you make and the effect or the experience of the sound that has been produced. For example, if I make a certain sound, I can break glass. If I change the sound, I no longer break glass. Therefore, there is this very close connection between the sounds that are produced and the effects that are experienced from those sounds. Now, in most languages, there is no awareness of this intimate relationship that exists between the sound and its meaning in terms of experience. So, for example, if you take the word peace in English, when I say peace, the first thought that comes is, of course, the peace of mind. But one can also think of the piece of cake, and therefore there is no connection, inherent connection of the meaning of the sound piece and what we understand by it. Consequently, what happens is that the meanings of the words can change with time, with context, etc. Now, what happens in Sanskrit is that there is a deeper understanding of the connection that exists between the sound of a word and the experience of the sound of that word. So, for example, if we make the sound Shanti. Now, the word Shanti comes from the root Sham, which corresponds to the sonatory, or rather the sound effect of the experience of peace itself. It means Sham means quietness, peace, etc. And when one keeps producing that sound, just by the mere production of that sound, even if we did not understand its meaning, it would generate that experience in the one who is saying it as well as in the one who is listening to it. And therefore, the opening verse of the Raghuvamsha of Kalidasa depicts this very beautifully when it says, Vagartha viva samtriktau, where Vak or speech and Artha or meaning are completely embedded one in each other. So Sanskrit in this perspective is not just a language of communication, but it also becomes a language that is the creator of certain experiences. Another important question, since there are many of you who are going to invest their time in the study of this language, is that why should one invest time in learning a language well, especially in this context of Sanskrit? But why spend time learning any language at all? Do we need to, and why? So there are some who are of the opinion that since language is a medium of communication, it doesn't really matter how correct the grammar is, so long as we are able to express our thoughts and get the other person to understand what we mean. So they would say no, it's enough to manage to communicate. But then we also have another dimension of language, which necessitates that we put in a little more effort to master it to our best of capacity. In that case, we say that knowledge, good knowledge of any language facilitates better communication, of course. Since a language is a reflection of our thoughts and our personality, the greater one has an understanding of this language, the more easy it becomes to convey what we have in mind to the listener. If we are able to communicate our thoughts better to the person who is listening to us, it then helps us to generate more self-confidence, and it creates a better impact on its listeners. This in turn creates more freedom to share the complexity and subtleties of thought. So for example, if one is talking of an experience, in today's context where we tend to simplify a lot of our vocal expressions, if somebody asks, so how are you feeling? We summarize it in a word like great, awesome, nice. But these words like awesome, nice are very generic in today's context. Whereas if one was probably using more subtle shades like, I think it's a very beautiful day, or I'm feeling enriched, or I'm feeling excited about what is coming, or I don't know, just if we have certain more, if we have a richer vocabulary, it can make a conversation more richer and interesting. Another important aspect of language and why we need to invest in learning it well is because it is a means of communication, and therefore if we understand language well, it gives us access to many more people. Our world widens with a new language that is acquired. Similarly, when one knows another language, it also helps us to be understood by many other people. So we can understand as well as be understood by many others. And another very important aspect of language is that it allows us to access the mind of a people through their literature. If we have sufficient mastery of a language, it can really help us understand the different dimensions of concepts, of insights that people of different cultures experienced, which may be foreign to the culture that we belong to. So, understanding of a language allows us to appreciate and engage with people from different cultures in much more enriching manners. This obviously brings us to the important question of what is the relationship of language with culture, and is there a relationship of language with the mind? As we just mentioned, language is the vehicle and repository of the thinkings of a civilization. Since it is the medium of expressing our experiences, it also opens up the doors to these different universes that people have experienced in their lives and have shared their thoughts through different kinds of literature. There can be scientific literature, there can be aesthetic literature, drama, art, poetry. Literature spans across so many different fields of human experience. Another important question that I had asked is, what is the role of language to format the mind? Now, different languages require us to use our minds in different ways. I'll just give you an example. Like in the English language, you have words which might be written in the same way and yet sound differently, or rather, they are written differently and still sound the same. Like I gave you the example of the word peace. So we have P-E-A-C-E, which means peace, and we also have P-I-E-C-E, which means peace. Or for example, if you have the word door, which is D-O-O-R, is pronounced as door, but P-O-O-R would be poor. Now if somebody did not know the language and they tried reading the word door and poor put side by side, and they only knew one of them. So if they knew the word door, when they looked at poor, they would say poor. Or if they looked at poor, if they knew the word poor and they looked at door, they would say doer. So we see how the mind needs to function differently in order to remember, to register that in the word door, the D-O-O-R, the O-O stands for O sound, whereas in the word poor, O-O stands for U-O sound. The mind has to work differently in registering and processing this information. Now in the case of Sanskrit, what happens is that there is only a single pronunciation of a single letter, and therefore the mind can gain a certain confidence that if it is written in this particular manner, it will always be pronounced in that manner no matter where it appears. So if you write ka with an akara, which will be a ka, if you write a la with an akara, it will still be la. There's no way that that akara will suddenly behave like some other sound, and therefore the mind registers this process of recognizing words and pronouncing them in a different manner. Therefore, the way a language is formatted also enables the mind to be formatted in a different way, because it is processing the language in different ways. In the same way, language not only just processes our mind in a very literal sense in terms of how the language is used and expressed, but it also shapes one's worldview in terms of the words that it forms to express certain experiences of people from that culture. Now in today's context, we tend to use the word private and public very easily, but little do we know that these concepts of private are actually a very English experience. If we look at the Indian context in general, we notice that we don't really have too much of this idea of my private space and a public space, which has its own social and individual issues probably. But it just is important to understand that when the word private is being used in an English context, it need not necessarily mean the same thing for an Indian mind which is using the term private, because we have a different worldview. Similarly, we have other words like dharma, which is very, very hard to translate in English using just one word. So it is translated as law of the universe, duty, the thing to be done, etc., etc. Or we have another word, sukha. So sukha means happiness, but when we go deeper into the term itself, it opens up a completely different dimension of the word, which we will discover in our coming sessions. So basically, there are certain words in different languages which are non-translatable entirely in another language, because they represent a certain experience which is quite unique to the language in which it has been conceived of. Now the question is, a very obvious question that comes forth is, what are some of the challenges involved in learning a language? You might have already started guessing what it might be based on your own experience of trying to pick up any language. So we see first and foremost that the fundamental structures of a language are its sounds, and then the grammar. So learning the phonetics of a language is one of the most important steps in trying to acquire a certain understanding and mastery of the language. Secondly, the grammar of course plays a very important role, because if one doesn't understand the grammar of a language, then it can hamper our expression as well as our comprehension of other people's sharings. Next, it is very important also to build a very rich vocabulary in any language, and that is a challenge sometimes for various reasons. Another aspect of the challenges of learning languages is about familiarizing oneself with an appropriate usage. So I'll just give you an example which is a bit funny, but it is in the context of the Indian usage of the word backside. Now we tend to use the word backside to denote, the behind of anything. So the backside of the book or the backside of the house. But in the British context, the term backside really refers to the buttocks. And therefore, when we say the backside of the house to an English person, he will be quite, stunned about what exactly you're trying to say. So this is just an example that I decided to share, but to show you that there is a certain need to understand the cultural context of which words are used, and therefore not make the mistake of being misunderstood in a particular context itself. Another important challenge of trying to learn a language is absolutely finding the right motivation to invest in it and in mastering it. We discussed earlier on why it was important to try and master a language, because the better we know a language, the more it gives us the confidence to deal with our own expressions in that language, as well as to be able to convey our thoughts in a more precise manner to our listeners. So having given you this background of language in general, I thought let's look at the language Sanskrit in particular and see what it has to offer to us. So what is Sanskrit, or Samskritam as we say it? Sanskritam or Samskritam comes from the two words Samyak Kritam iti. Iti means thus. So Samyak means well and Kritam means done. So Sanskrit is that which is well done. It is well put together, well formed or perfected. So Sanskrit itself means that it is perfect in every aspect of its representation, from the level of its sounds to the formation of its words to the expression of it in terms of grammar. There seems to be a very beautiful precision and perfection in which this language has been laid out, and therefore what is notable here, this language was so beautiful in its formation that people just had to call it Sanskritam. It was so perfect. Another term that is used to denote Sanskrit is the term Deva Bhasha. So what do we mean by Deva Bhasha? The word Deva comes from the root div, which means to shine or to illuminate. Because of the transparency of all levels of this language, the consistency in the structure of this language, it sort of brings a lot of illumination in the one who uses it and in the ones who understand it. So therefore the notion of Deva Bhasha could have come from there. Another way of understanding the Deva Bhasha is what we had discussed about the creative power of this sound, that when we are saying something, we are also creating that whole experience, which is a quality, let's say, that the gods possess, that they have the power of creation of whatever they say. So these are possible explanations, but there might be many others that you might find in different forums. Another notion about Sanskrit is that it is one of the most wonderful languages. So let's look at a quote on the beauty of Sanskrit by Professor Friedrich Schlegel, who was a writer and critic, a German writer and critic who established the first chair of Indology in Germany at Hannoben. So he says, justly it is called Sanskrit, that is perfect, finished. Sanskrit combines these various qualities possessed separately by other tongues: Grecian copiousness, deep tone Roman force, the divine afflatus characterizing the Hebrew tongues, judged by an organic standard of the principal elements of language. Sanskrit excels in grammatical structure and is indeed the most perfectly developed of all idioms, not excepting Greek and Latin. There are certain frequently asked questions and comments that I hear about Sanskrit, and I've just listed some of them. There could be many more. So one of the most frequently asked questions is Sanskrit a dead language? Was it ever a spoken language? Is it very difficult to learn? And why invest in learning this language today? So in answer to the question, is Sanskrit a dead language? It would be interesting for you to just think of what is your impression. But probably because you have chosen to learn this, to take up this course, you feel that there is hope and there is a lot of relevance in this subject. So what we find that no, Sanskrit is not a dead language at all. It is recorded that it is the native language of at least 14,135 people in the 2001 census. And I can assure you that since then the numbers have increased enormously, because the second point that I've mentioned is that there is an organization called Samskrita Bharati that has invested a lot of its time, and many people are engaged in trying to promote spoken Sanskrit across the globe. So there are millions of speakers of Sanskrit due to their efforts who use this language in their daily conversations of everyday life. Next, there are 7 Sanskrit speaking villages like Mattur and Hosahalli in Karnataka, Jhiri, Bhaguwar and Mohad in Madhya Pradesh, Sasna in Orissa, Gadoda in Rajasthan. These small villages need not necessarily have Sanskrit as the only medium of communication between them, but many of them have accepted or agreed that Sanskrit would be one of the important means of communication in that particular region. Another important fact of Sanskrit is that it is an official language of the country. We also have a daily news, a DD, then there's a radio called Divyavani and newspapers Sudharma, Samprati Varta, etc. Was it ever a spoken language? So Dr. David Frawley, who is a Sanskrit scholar, teacher and writer in America, he says, Sanskrit is the oldest and most continually used languages in the world. By the most conservative accounts, it has been used continuously since 1500 BC. By more liberal accounts, it was in use before 6000 BC. Classical Sanskrit follows the same basic pattern since the time of Panini, who probably lived around the time of the Buddha, which is around 600 BC. It has the largest literature of any language, along with the sacred literature of 2 of the world's greatest religions, Hinduism and Buddhism. It possesses a larger group of works on spirituality, metaphysics and mythology than any other language. It has an extensive literature of poetry, drama and philosophy, though much of it has been lost in time. Why invest in learning this language today? As many of you might have already heard, it's regarded as a very good language for computers. In today's context, where yoga has become like a worldwide craze, many practitioners of yoga sooner or later want to understand the original text and therefore seek to learn Sanskrit. And therefore, if as Indians we know Sanskrit, it would help us to delve into our own rich tradition and unlock the vast treasure trove of knowledge that our ancients have passed on to us. So it is therefore a master key to unlock this rich heritage that we possess. And Sanskrit is a yoga in itself as a tool of well-being. This is something that I will take up a little more in depth in the following session. And is Sanskrit important? So this is what Sri Aurobindo has to say. He says, the ancient classical creations of the Sanskrit tongue, both in quality and body and abundance of excellence, in their potent originality and force and beauty, in their substance and art and structure, in grandeur and justice and charm of speech, and in the height and width of the reach of their spirit, stand very evidently in the front rank among the world's great literatures. The language itself, as has been universally recognized by those competent to form a judgment, is one of the most magnificent, the most perfect and wonderfully significant literary instruments developed by the human mind, at once majestic and sweet and flexible, strong and clearly formed, and full and vibrant and subtle. Sri Aurobindo has been very generous in the way that he has elaborated on the characteristics of this language. But as you invest more time and have a direct experience of this language, you will begin to experience that each one of these descriptions that have been laid out are very deeply true to describe the nature of this language itself. And what is the role of Sanskrit in India? So we have a quote by this famous American historian and philosopher Will Durant, who says, India was the motherland of our race, and Sanskrit the mother of Europe's languages. She was the mother of our philosophy, mother through the Arabs of much of our mathematics, mother through the Buddha of the ideals embodied in Christianity, mother through the village community of self-government and democracy. Mother India is in many ways the mother of us all. So that's a very, I think, a very important reason why it is worthwhile understanding this language and going deep into this vast treasure that it presents to us. And finally, these two quotes by Jawaharlal Nehru, who was the first Prime Minister of the country. He says, if I was asked what is the greatest treasure which India possesses and what is her finest heritage, I would answer unhesitatingly that it is the Sanskrit language and the literature and all that it contains. This is the magnificent inheritance, and so long as this endures and influences the life of our people, so long will the basic genius of India continue. If our race forgot the Buddha, the Upanishads, and the great epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, India would cease to be India. And I'll close with a quote by Mahatma Gandhi. He says, without the study of Sanskrit, one cannot become a true Indian and a true learned man. Now, in this introduction, I have tried to help you recognize or understand why languages in themselves are important, and also to present to you a few reasons, a few motivating factors to study Sanskrit with seriousness and to try and see what are the benefits that you experience in terms of your access to a lot of knowledge that is lying tapped, that is waiting to be tapped by us, and also in terms of experiencing the benefits of it at the level of our personal lives. Just to give a small reason of why the study of Sanskrit is important for us as Indians especially. So as Indians, one of the important reasons we need to delve into the study of Sanskrit is because we have a vast treasure trove of literature of something like 4 million to 30 million manuscripts, of which 10 million or 10% are manuscripts dealing with scientific knowledge. In today's context, Sanskritists who study Sanskrit don't know science subjects, and those who study science are unaware of Sanskrit. As a result, there is no marriage that is taking place to be able to tap the knowledge that is hidden in these manuscripts. So the need of the hour is that we invest in the learning of this language in order to be able to unravel so much of our own cultural heritage and probably make great contributions to the future of humanity and its development. Thank you.